Welcome to Pub in the Desert, where we bring you honest, curious conversations about faith and the human experience. I'm Matthias Miller, here with my co host, Kevin David Kridner. Every time we start these episodes, we recap our three guiding principles, and here they are. First, you don't need to be fixed, you need to be known. And we believe that love is knowing and being known. Second, we approach difficult topics with genuine curiosity. We aren't here to win arguments, we're here to understand. And third, we don't come with preset agendas. We let conversations unfold naturally, and we follow where authenticity leads us. So pull up a chair, grab a drink, and let's explore what union looks like with God, with others, and with ourselves. Um, so, Kevin, you and I have been having conversations offline around Saul and Jonathan and some of these figures in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start out with something I've been thinking about over the last 24 hours. Um, and we'll see if it ties in or how. Um, but there's this observation that responsibility. Okay, so if you think about responsibility, um, there's some people who take a higher level of responsibility than other people. And as a child, you're expected that that your needs outpace your capacity. Like I need help getting dressed, getting food. I need a roof over my head. All of these things. Um,
Right.
and obviously, not every human shares the same path of development, but broadly speaking, across the spectrum, most humans will develop their capacity expands so that they can take care of themselves, start taking care of other people, and it goes on from there. Um, the challenge is that when you are a person who has other people relying on you in some capacity, and you don't step up, or there's any part of your life where you're not taking responsibility for that, and you don't have somebody in your corner to help cover for you, the people in your sphere of influence take the hit. So,
Right.
what what do I mean? And I've been thinking a lot about the ripple effect of irresponsibility. Um,
Wow.
so here's what it looks like for me. You have a you have a business owner who is a largely absentee business owner. This is and then they have and so they create a culture of delegation by abdication, just kind of like, oh, you just go figure it out. And
Right.
then they have a second in command of some kind who shares the same traits. And
Mm.
then team members within that who share the same traits, or maybe and then that individual in there, like uh, ends up carrying taking. There's somebody in there at the bottom of the organization. Typically it's an inverse
Case.
power
Yeah. Of
structure who
course.
takes the brunt of it. It's the
Right.
conscientious bookkeeper. It's somebody in there who's super conscientious who wants to make
Yep.
this work, and they take the brunt.
Right.
So they're already hyper responsible. They end up taking more responsible than necessary. What happens when that person's capacity exceeds? Can't handle it.
Yeah. Right.
Well, now it can affect marriages. It can affect relationships, personal coping mechanisms, health breakdowns. There's one business leader who actually said, like the COO is like as an entrepreneur, you should never have a heart attack. That's the COO's job. Um,
Right.
and so,
Right.
and they do that very well. But
That's blunt.
uh, well, I mean, but they see the problems and they take responsibility to fix them and turn them around. Um, but if you have somebody at that level, then this individual's whoever's at the bottom of the food chain, because let's be honest, it's kind of what it turns into. Um,
Right.
ends up like their families end up being affected, their kids end up being like the people in their environment end up being affected,
Yep.
and it's very easy to say, all right, but look at the money you made, look at all this stuff, like it's um and I've also observed it that with leaders who are there's some leaders who, as a leader, it's very difficult if you are less self-aware of your own stressors than the people around you. And when you I mean it's true of anybody. But when the stress of our lives reaches a certain threshold, It's kind of like everything leaks out on everybody else. And sometimes toxic environments aren't created intentionally. It's because, I mean, probably most times not, but but it's because there's an overflow of stress and strain for an unidentified reason, and then everybody
Right.
else ends up taking the brunt of it, and it just becomes painful the more. It's always painful, but the bigger the sphere of influence, um, and whether that's social media, whether that's the bigger the size of the church, the bigger the business, then the
Right.
more people end up getting affected, and the more difficult the consequences. But it can also be a lonely place then, in that place where if you are that leader to sort things out. So that's it was just very curious to watch the ripple effect of I never really observed that in this way before, but when I don't take responsibility that is mine to carry, when I don't, then there is a ripple effect. Somebody has to carry it. It doesn't just disappear.
Right. Right. The bill will come due
Well said.
at some point, and somebody's gonna have to pay it. And it just seems like a very, very human problem. We'd like to look at it and say, no, it's just church. No, it's just business. No, it's just da, da, da. Whatever our context tell us, it just is. But it seems to be across the board, just human endeavor. And we don't. Here's the issue for me. Like we've talked about this. We've been looking at, um, just profiles of people in the Old Testament. And what really, really bothered me was a lot of times these people get flattened into two-dimensional images. And so you're just up top looking at this board, seeing this two-dimensional image run around the board. It just doesn't seem fair or right or healthy. I gotta sneeze. Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Oh, sorry for the break. And what really fascinated me was what if we dove in and actually looked at the facets of these people? Whether it's Samson or it's Ruth or it's Esther or it's Saul or it's Jonathan or it's any of these people, what if we refuse to create this two-dimensional image of them and instead understood what was going on 3D? That's what I hear when I hear you talking is like this is like you could flatten this into a 2D issue, responsibility and lack thereof.
Right.
Or we could see the 3D version of what actually is going on,
Right.
which takes time and pain to do it. It takes putting my preconceived notions on the shelf and go, what's actually here? What do I see? What do I hear? What do I think? What do I feel? Like, allow a human being to be a human being.
Yeah.
As we have, I guess, a tangential line from what you were saying is we have this culture within the Western world of a victim culture, which encourages no one to take responsibility, but to look to give blame somewhere else. And I think that's easy for us to see, or at least for me to see. I don't know. Maybe others see it too. But what about those ones who are not, who are taking responsibility, who are not victims, do not see themselves as victims? Now, this is not to say that they haven't been victimized. Me,
Right.
you, anybody out there. It's not to say they haven't been victimized, but they refuse to stay in that place where they're defined as victim. What happens to people like that in a culture of shifting blame and victim ideology?
I mean, functionally, repeatedly, what I see, it's it depends on the prevailing culture. And if the prevailing culture is driven by someone who buys into the victim mindset, then those people become, or from someone who tolerates the victim way of thinking, um, those people end up taking the blame, taking the being assigned responsibility, um, and ultimately are put in the difficult position of, do I want things to go well, or do I want to stick to what I'm here to do?
Right, right. That person becomes the bearer of many burdens.
Right.
So what do you do with that?
Okay, so surely in your lifetime you've had people who've come to you who've not been able to carry their own weight.
Yeah.
How do you personally, how have you personally managed, or have you for seasons become the bearer of burdens? How have you avoided becoming that where you shouldn't? How do you know where you should be or not?
Wow. Yes, been on both sides, the bearer of burdens and then asking people to bear my burdens, both sides. Um, and probably extreme, I wouldn't say extreme, but probably profound dysfunction on both sides.
Mhm.
My personal methodology or personality ego structure was I can be the burden bearer. I will carry it. And I would carry it and carry it and carry it until, because I believe I had to. It gave me value, it gave me worth. I would carry it until I would break down physically sometimes, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And over the years, I've seen that pattern be developed, the bearer of the burdens. And I could always paint it as altruistic.
Right.
Yeah, as I'm doing this because this is what I'm called to do, or this is what I'm meant to do, or that. And whether I was or whether I wasn't, that's up to God.
Sure.
But that's one thing I learned as I dove into the Saul story is that calling is for formation.
Yeah.
God calls us into something to form us. It's not that we're formed and he calls us. He calls us to form us.
Yeah.
And as I look back over my life to answer your question more clearly, what I've seen is him call me to do the work that I've done and me making tragic, horrific mistakes in the midst of that and him shaping me through it. And
Right.
I think there's something powerful there too, based on how you respond to it. Because I think you have the David model of how you respond to that formation and calling. And I think you have the Saul model. And not to make them 2D characters by any stretch of the imagination, but what you see with Saul very often is in his formation, when the moment of formation comes, he makes a mistake, he makes poor choice, whatever. He always runs and hides, emotionally, spiritually, physically sometimes. The very beginning of the story, he's hiding in the baggage,
Right.
right? And that's a big moment. Like let's not compress it into, pixelated, one-dimensional thing. Like this is the man who's going to be the first king of this godly nation. and he's chosen by this prophet, and he's supposed to lead this nation. And man, that's a heavy burden to carry.
Well, and on top of that, it's for some really bizarre motives, like but of the people. Like it's in some essence, they're asking for him to play God for them,
Right.
um, and maybe beyond essence. I mean, it's interesting to frame this in our context. Imagine the founding fathers, and everybody's like, George Washington, let's go. And he's like, has anybody seen George lately? And
Right.
uh, um, he's in the carriage in the stagecoach out back because underneath all the pile of, you know,
Yeah.
everything. Like, um,
Yeah.
imagine in our day and age what the press would look like for this, you know,
Oh man.
or if this were a different country, the, you know, insert name of country, appoints cowardly leader, um, invites plunder from other nations. Like,
Right.
I mean,
Couldn't be found for the inauguration.
right, exactly. Couldn't be found for the inauguration.
He was
Um,
on the subway somewhere.
yeah, exactly. Hiding with the homeless. I don't know. Like, I think I want to touch a
Incredible.
little. Go ahead.
Yeah, just an incredible. I mean, to not flatten Saul into this character, like it is an incredible burden that is being put before him. And before you start casting stones at him, how would you respond?
When we see that Saul's Achilles heel is urgency, the pressure, the furnace, like that's
Yeah,
always what got him in trouble, and that urgency, that drive to take immediate action. But in that story where he's waiting for Samuel to come make the sacrifice, you have to understand that you've got tens of thousands of people up the hill, and he's down in the valley with hundreds, and the time by some measurement, and I don't know, I'm not a scholar here. It's up for debate exactly where he was at on the precise timeline, but
yeah,
regardless, that urgency got to him. So there was the pressure of formation, and so I think there's one thing that I wanted to highlight in this concept of calling being formation, which showed up in a conversation this past Sunday, talking about Ephesians 2:10,
mm,
where it talks about that we are his workmanship, God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them.
yeah,
And in our Western culture, English language, we don't differentiate between singular versus plural. Um, but this is a plural we. And I think it's important to note that by very definition in nature, calling is a communal and triunal experience. It's us as the people of God, as the body of Christ, being formed into His image in relationship with Him, um,
right,
and it's not individualized.
right, right. Yeah, and then you contrast that with the person of David, and consistently over David's life, when the catastrophe happens, when the poor choice happens, when the false perception of reality happens, like you see him seek presence, not run away and hide, but seek presence. And I think that I think it's really fascinating. I think to a certain degree, David became a mirror for Saul.
Hmm.
And when that thing in front of you, whether it's a person or it's a situation or it's an idea, becomes a mirror for you, if you don't like what you see, you only have one option. You got to break the mirror.
Well, technically, you have two. You could change
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could
or
go,
break the
oh
mirror.
wow, yeah, oh wow, this is what I'm seeing, and these things need to change. And God brings people alongside us in the midst of those seeing in the mirror moments that give us a opportunity to grow and change. Or I could break the mirror, or I could
Right.
pin David to a wall with a spear.
Right.
Those are our options.
I think it's very intriguing, David's response, because the Psalms are kind of his, um, I don't know, it's almost like his blueprint or his framework or his container for engaging with God in the fire of life.
Right, right.
It's
It's this working out, like it's this space where he's working out what's in his head, what's in his soul, in his body, what he's feeling. Like you read those Psalms and they are so raw, so raw. And like to your point, it seems to be this container where he can put this stuff. What do because where else is it going to go?
yeah. So then there's also the question of what's David's experience like as the mirror.
Right,
And I think, I mean, this is where the whole listen, just follow God and do the right thing, and your life will be blessed thing really breaks down. I mean, you can be blessed, or you could have the king try to kill you. I mean,
right. Think about that point you just made. He was anointed. He was blessed. He's going to be the next king. He's been told this when he was a teenager by all accounts. Now imagine being put in that position where you know that you're the next king and the old king's still alive. And we got to keep it on the down low. We can't be talking about it. So you're carrying this burden of this is where I'm supposed to be. Oh, I mean, the head of a nation, like life's going to be beautiful. It's wonderful. You got the palaces, you've got war, you've got all these idyllic things. And then look at David's life. It doesn't seem like blessing to blessing.
it doesn't seem possible to for a human to go through that kind of suffering, that kind of. I mean, he David's hiding was there's a big sense in which Saul was hiding from God and trying to be visible to the people, and there's some sense in which David was hiding from the people and being visible to God.
Right.
Um, and it seems like it's hard to fathom. Okay, first of all, I mean, bearing in mind that the combat. Um, this is an interesting little side note that came up in as I was digging into some of this is the concept of combat trauma. I mean, this is not air warfare, um,
No.
and that's that does a number on you, and that would do a number on you. So, and it's like it, it's hard to fathom what David would have ended up as had he not had some kind of outlet for um, these kinds of things. And it's very curious. How did David settle upon why did David turn his heart towards God? Why was that? How did that become what happened in him? What was his experience? What was his decision? What were his decisions that led him to let God be his refuge in these types of
Right.
situations?
Well, there's a theme here, right? Like you have David as the shepherd, which means a lot of time out in the wild alone. And there's a lot of formation that happens there. It's almost like he's drawn out into the desert where God can speak tenderly to him, to echo Hosea 2. And you've got the same thing with Moses. He flees Egypt, and then he's a shepherd out in the desert for what appears to be about 4 decades. That God drawing him out into the desert where he can speak tenderly to him. Abraham, leave your father's house, come out into the desert where I can shape you and form you. Jesus, after his baptism, come out into the desert where I can shape you and form you. John the Baptist, come out into the desert where I can shape you and form you. And then they have this sense of personhood that comes from that, where you can stand in front of the most powerful man in the world in both Abraham and Moses's experience, stand in front of Pharaoh and say, no, it's not going to happen. Or Abraham, you can argue with God. Or, all of these situations. Or David, you can dance in your loincloth in front of the population of Israel. Like you have this sense of personhood. You know who you are. And I wonder if that response is directly attributable to that time in the desert. That time we as human beings seem to avoid like the plague.
Okay, so, but not every individual's experience in the desert ends well because we have individuals um, who've spent time in some form of desert who've ended up having bizarre revelations and starting false religions and doing very weird, or I don't know what, just doing things like that.
Right, right.
So, what's the delineating factor then? Because it seems to me like the desert is the kind of thing that I think it's an inevitable choice. You have to choose, but it's not inevitable what choice you will make. And it seems to me like what is the delineation?
Right. Well, maybe there's a direction here, a hint here in the story of Saul. So he has very successful campaigns early on in his what do you call it, kingship, kingness, his position. And there's this moment where he conquers this group, and he's supposed to execute the king. God had given an order, Amalek, I think his name is,
Yeah.
and he refuses to do it. And that's the point where Samuel comes in and says, God has removed you from the throne. And Saul's response in that moment is utterly fascinating. He doesn't repent. He doesn't say, oh, I messed up. I didn't follow. He doesn't acknowledge this. He says, stand with me before the elders of Israel. Justify me before the people.
And initially Samuel refused.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's when everything starts to go downhill. But Saul's orientation at that point was to others. I need you to tell me who I am. Maybe that desert season, a fundamental part of it is orientation. If the only thing you want in that desert season is to return to the city, you're not going to learn the lessons that you need to.
Right.
If in that desert season you are asking the question, you're wrestling with God. Why did this happen? How did this happen? What's going, all the wrestling that happens internally in us as human beings, then there's a shaping and a forming that's gonna happen. Because God's going to answer that. You're gonna be in conversation with him. So maybe it's a fundamental matter of orientation. On one side, out of, well, and Saul's a great example, right? His desire to be liked and to be known and to be respected leads him to Endor at the end of the story, where
Right.
he's consulting a medium to get into contact with Samuel so Samuel can make him feel better about the situation he's in.
I would take the desert experience one step further that maybe the wrestling happens for a season, but there's some point in the desert experience where there's a surrender that says, I'm going to be at home in this experience
Yeah.
as long as necessary. And that's very different from, I can't articulate it, but it's different than just, roll over and die kind of thing. It's not, you're not being a victim to that, but you're finding a sense of dependence on God in the middle of the hardship, and finding your home in him ultimately. And and with many of these people, you I don't know if it's all of them, um, but in many of these people you see a reluctance to leave the desert.
Right. Maybe that's the switch that gets flipped somewhere along the way. You've been out here, and there's a longing to be back in comfort and safety. We all have it. And at some point, it becomes really, really clear. And the switch that gets flipped, at least for me, how it got flipped was I'm in this situation. It is so completely, utterly painful. I can't do anything about it. I've tried everything I know how to do. I have reached the end of myself,
Right.
and I just lay it all down. And it's not like there's some moment where it's okay, I lay it all down. It's the consistent acknowledgement that I cannot do this. All my plans have brought me here. All my efforts, all my strategies, all my negotiations, everything has brought me here until I get to the place where I go, what is it all what is it all worth? What does it all cost me? What has all of this brought me? And I think that's the moment the switch gets flipped. But the fascinating thing to me is some people never flip that switch, no matter how painful it gets, no matter how deep into whatever circumstances you're in you get, it never gets flipped.
When that switch gets flipped, like there's so we've got like three thoughts jostling for their attention. There's this sense of living outside, and there's this sense in which you can never understand a system living inside of it,
Right.
and and I think the desert ultimately is a removal from a human system in which there are certain prices that are worth paying to gain certain types of things and certain activities and certain sacrifices that are normalized. And I think stepping outside of that into the desert is an intentional act of disconnecting from that system. And if it's reflective of the idea of what does it profit someone to gain the whole world and to lose their soul. In a lot of sense, the desert is the let's step out of the gain the whole world gain
Yeah.
that system. And when you do that, suddenly you recognize the poverty of spirit that you've been living with. And you
Right.
thought that God was present with you in the middle of that, and he was. But when you
Hmm.
step outside of that, you make room for a deeper place of abiding, of presence, of belonging, of all of those things that you didn't know were occupied by these other things,
Right.
but he did.
Right. Right.
And so that invitation to, and maybe it's practically, I mean, it's kind of like the age old saying of like, you can, you tell a kid to sit up and they're standing up on the inside. It's like you can go in the desert, but you're still in in that place in your heart.
Right.
um, there's that surrender of the heart to say, no, I will let go of those things so that I can have what he
Right.
wants me to have.
Yeah, there's this I heard this a long time ago. I think it was Paul Young who said this. I was watching a video of him giving his testimony before church. The guy who wrote The Shack.
Yeah.
Um, and he was saying that he made this statement. He was talking about his life, and he had this affair in the moment where his wife came or gave him a call and said, "I need to talk to you." And they sat down. She said, "I know." Da, da, da. And just the fallout from that, close to suicide afterwards, just all sorts of very human experiences. And he made this statement. He said, I've come to see that God's wrath is his love.
Mhm.
Standing in the presence of pure truth, when you have a diluted form of truth within you, you can't not but be destroyed. And maybe that's what Jesus is talking about. Unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it can't sprout and grow. A lot of this imagery that we talk about, but maybe part of that Saul-like, David-like experience, Moses, Abraham out in the desert, is coming to experience God's love in such a way that it feels like wrath, it feels like death. The purification, the sifting that happens.
There's a force of impact that when you mention wrath, like there's this felt sense of impact.
Yeah,
And but what you're suggesting is in the human wrath that we experience, it's one person's ego, one person's will against another, the
yeah,
overpowering of will. And what you're describing is I mean, it really is it's the running full sprint and chanting to yourself, the wall isn't there, the wall isn't there, the wall isn't there. Oof,
right.
I guess the wall is there.
The wall might be there.
Wall might be there. Um,
Yeah. I had this conversation recently where this lady was talking about how she rage cleans sometimes to deal with her uh, uh, nervous system just being so dysregulated. And she started to describe this, and she had this time where she started cleaning, but it wasn't rage. And I suggested maybe it's wrath cleaning,
mhm.
and maybe that's a healthy thing. The rage is destructive. There's something that's being destroyed within that because it's fear based, it's fear driven. But if it's wrath, it's love driven.
Yeah.
And there's something that's getting worked out inside me as I do this. And maybe that's the difference between another difference within the desert is rage versus wrath. Am I submitting to the excoriating experience of God's love in that place? Or am I just experiencing this as rage, as destruction? Because you have these people, and I'm sure you've probably read about them or seen videos or whatever, where they've been through the fire multiple times and they're on the other side of it and they look back and they go, I can see now how beautiful that was, how much I needed it, how much I learned in that season, who I've become as a person because of it. How do you do that other than understanding the all-consuming fire that love is, and being able to look back and see the beauty that came from the ashes. We like to sing about it in church, beauty from the ashes, and but you don't know unless you've been through that the price you pay for beauty coming from ashes.
We you don't know the price, but you also don't know the value and as well.
Yeah,
One of
yeah,
the things I've personally wrestled with is that in my, I don't know, I would say my life has been actually quite relatively free from suffering, but in my own journeys through difficulty, and I've seen what going into the desert can bring. It I, this is maybe way too honest, but when other people start to describe their entrance into the desert, there's this excitement in my inside of me
yeah,
because
yeah,
from their perspective, which feels very wrong in an attempt to be sensitive to what they're experiencing. That's the part that feels so wrong. But the other
yeah,
part is the knowing of the beauty of what emerges. And my favorite people in the world, I'm sure if I would, some of them I should just sit down and ask because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if I were to sit down with some of my favorite people in the world and ask them, tell me what your desert was. Where
yeah,
was the pressure? Where was the fire? What shaped you into who you are today? I'm confident that they have a story in which they were brought to they were taken out into the desert and he was the
yeah.
only one who could sustain them.
Right, right. I was sitting with a friend of mine recently, and um, in the midst of a pretty dark time for me. And he was just listening and asking questions and just being what he could for me at the point. And he looked at me at a certain point and he goes, I'm kind of jealous of you, envious. And in the midst of it, I'm like, why? Why? And he goes, because I haven't been through this season. And I know that I need to. And at some point, God's going to bring it about. And I looked at him and I go, I don't want this for you. I don't want this for you. And he goes, he said something along the lines of like, watch what you say.
Mm.
Because you could be standing in front of what God is trying to do, keeping me from this season. It's like, oh man, I know what this feels like. I know what this pain, because I'm in the midst of it. I'm in the midst of it, of his wrath, in the midst of it. And I don't want my best friend to experience that, much less my worst enemy. And yet I know from my experiences that it is the best thing that can happen. But that wrath, man, there will come a point, and I suspect David, Peter, Paul, Abraham, Moses, all these people, I suspect that they are grateful for the wrath, for the love that exposed them. And I'm talking about God's love that exposed them. Now, he uses, I believe, situations, people, circumstances in our lives for that to happen. And I'm not talking about the individuals that are part of that playing out. I'm talking about the process of wrath purifying us.
Right.
There's something here, Matthias. Like we talk about trauma, combat, PTSD, and that kind of thing, and it is a very real thing. But I think there's something modern in that look back onto that, what we would probably consider more violent time. The way war was handled was face to face, hand to hand, shield walls, all that kind of stuff. But there's something that is formed in a person in that type of battle that creates a strength if you allow it to.
Mm.
And maybe that's part of what we're missing as men in this culture. And maybe metaphorical, maybe real world. In our internet culture where you can sit behind a keyboard and you can attack somebody, you can send an email or you can do a social media post and never have to come face to face with that person.
I think if we had to, um, I think it's very clear if you're looking at the world that the weapons of our warfare today are psychological.
Yes.
Um, Hence the surge of interest in things centered around psychology. What is the shield that I need to pick up? What is the sword that I need to carry? How do I use this for good and not for evil? How do I protect the people who need protection? And
Yeah.
even from a leadership standpoint, it's the shift has been so profound over the last 20 years that many there's a generational shift in terms of leadership for people who are um, older generations in leadership are needing to adapt to understand the world, the psychological warfare that the younger generations are experiencing in some capacity. I mean, the backhanded comments on social media is a perfect example of that. Um, I'm very curious from your perspective. There's two potentially related questions, but you talked about the formation of the person, the I don't know how you exactly described it, but the idea was that in the desert, there's a sense of wholeness, of coherence as a person that emerges. Um, and I would love to hear more of your explanation of what that actually is. In addition to that, the question of in the what do you see? Um, what is the formation that you see emerging from the type of hand-to-hand combat, more violent type of warfare that would have been historically prevalent?
I would say primarily, and this is a big picture conceptual look, 10,000 foot down look, is is that what happens is you cannot run away from your fear. You're in the
Okay.
midst of it. It is right in front of you in a very real physical way.
Yeah.
And so confronting the fear, which I would say is the issue that all of us deal with, is fear in one form or another. And I think that that's the enemy's primary tactic is to get us to be afraid. Because when we're afraid, we're controllable.
Yeah.
And I think in these very real senses, this is a object lesson in what it looks like to confront your fear. What does
Yeah.
it look like to have somebody in front of me that has a sword and has armor and I know wants to kill me? That's a fear.
That's a fear.
Yeah. And you've got somebody like David, who, as a shepherd, is out in the fields and has to protect his flock. He knows that there is going to be some sort of beast that is going to attack his flock, and he has to protect his flock. And so he has to come face to face with fear like that at a very early age. So I was sitting with this couple over the weekend, and the husband was talking about, work experiences and some person that he was involved in in a ministry with, and he really didn't like him. And within the context of the team building exercise, they had to do this exercise where they stood across from each other and they looked into each other's eyes and said no words. And he's like, my thought was, I hate this guy. How am I going to stand eye to eye with him? And I asked him what was behind the hate. And he sat there for a few minutes and he said, to be really honest, I was afraid. I was afraid of him. And then I had to face that fear by standing across from him and looking into his eyes without words for an extended period of time, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, whatever the case was. He had to face his fear. And I think that that is what is missing in our world.
Right.
When my students come into and out of my class, the first day I set this rule, when you come into the class, we look each other in the eye and we say good morning or good afternoon, whatever the time of day is. And I want them to get used to eye contact
Mm.
because it humanizes both of us. I'm
Right.
not just this authority within a room, and you're not just this kid who's sitting there. Like it humanizes us. And for all the great things about what the internet can do and what online platforms can do and all that kind of stuff, what's missing is the eye to eye contact.
Right.
And I think that that is something that has to happen in our world for us to mature.
Which, as a side note, you probably know this from all of your research in attachment theory. My understanding is that that eye contact is one of the primary ways that humans synchronize emotions.
Exactly. There's a book called Iron John, written by a guy named Robert Bly, and he's talking about the formation of a man. And to your point, what we've been talking about as far as, combat, trauma, all that kind of stuff, he says that historically over time we've gone from face-to-face encounters, at least in the warrior sphere. We've gone from warrior, which is an essential part of development of any person, and we've distanced it
Right.
where it was face to face. Then it's a slingshot. Then it's an arrow. Then it's a rifle. Then it's a missile, and it extends outwards. And so what's lost is that warrior identity that comes up. So you become a soldier, yes, but a soldier is not a warrior in the classical sense of it.
So, this is really fascinating because okay, jump back to the stories of the situations I described earlier at the beginning. There's a very real sense in which imagine this were on a battlefield. The equivalent, if you could make this tangible, the equivalent is you have the king, and then you have the general, and then you have the foot soldiers, and the king and general are hiding in the back and be like, foot soldiers, go. Like you take the hit. Like,
Yeah,
and when you frame it in that perspective, that's like, wow, that's kind of twisted. The other thing that's fascinating there's I was watching an interview this past week between Alex Hormozy and Tony Robbins, and Tony Robbins was talking about so Alex Hormozy is known for just a sheer amount of discipline and just show up, do the work, lives, eats, sleeps, work. Like he just gets stuff done, gets a massive amount of stuff done. And he's that's how he's built his businesses, um, and he was talking they were having a conversation around purpose and joy and some of these types of things. Tony Robbins shared the experience for himself where he cares about hunger because that was what he experienced as a child. Um,
right,
there were key moments, and so for a while he was writing checks like let's solve the hunger. One of the things that he mentioned that made the big shift from this just for this actually to have meaning was to put on a hat, put on a t-shirt, and go serve the food with the
Yeah.
people needing it, and
Eye to eye, face to
eye to
face.
eye, face to face, because it humanizes it. It puts it into the context of reality, and it brings meaning and purpose to it. And um, I do think this is I'm not the expert here and borrowing on other people's opinions that make sense to me, but I do think that the increasing push towards technology and digital the digital world and the shift that AI is bringing about is also bringing a rebound towards face to face and eye to eye. And
Yeah.
we saw COVID do that in an extent where people realized just how valuable that actually is. Um, and you almost have to taste the extreme to say, well, no, the extreme really isn't that good. Like,
All right. Well, there's something about union there, right? And talking about with attachment theory, eye to eye is one way to, sync emotions, integrate, right? Well, there's also in union, there is the face to face, but in that face to face, you have the option to seek to dominate in the face to face or to seek
right,
union in face to face. And what is war but that face to face seeking dominance?
right.
You have something I want, or you've done something I didn't like, and so we're going to go face to face.
But it can also be a revolt against domination. So I have something you want, and you're coming to take what's not yours. Don't you dare.
Exactly. And to me, in that sense, there's a the Catholic theology around just war. And in that sense, if somebody is invading you, then by all means, you have to stand up. You have to fight for that. Or if somebody is being abused or neglected or whatever the case may be, you have to face with that person who is doing the abusing or neglecting, and you have to get it to stop. There's that process that the face to face that has to happen, and that's the formation of a person. Aside from that, there is no formation.
This is I have to flash back to the book Kingdom Ethics. I don't even remember who wrote it. Um, and it's been probably 20 years since I've read it, but he was talking about the just war, the idea of just war. And his comment was that just war is always good in theory. It just breaks down in practice because we all have distorted motives when it comes to war.
Yep.
Um, and, and so, but that's a very, also peeling apart the layers of peeling apart the layers of responsibility. One of the challenges I have with missional nonprofits as an example, and this is there's a lot of good that they do, but
Mhm.
sometimes their mission can be so driven based on donor metrics that
Yep.
the people who the organization doesn't actually end up carrying the weight of the mission. Um,
Yeah.
so, so as an example, in the case of what I'm most familiar with is a foster and adoptive parenting in various capacities.
Mm.
It looks incredibly amazing to say, look, we've placed this many kids into this many homes. Like, look at these are amazing numbers. And the question is, what happens on the back? What happens after that? What's the rest of the story?
How does
Because you
that
can't.
play out?
How does that play out? Because you can't take a child who, I mean, the amount of disruption to a child generally is, well, it's proportional to the amount of disruptive experiences. So if it's if it's low disruption over a long period of time, that's going to be less severe than a long disruption over a long period, a big disruption over a long period of time. If but and having a child placed at in infancy also generally decreases the amount of time of disruption,
Mm.
generally lessens the long-term effect, even though there's a lot of things that happen in utero that do affect a child subconsciously throughout that period. And plus, anyway, there's a lot of stuff. We don't have to get into that. The question becomes, if our goal is adoption, then let's just post the numbers. But if our goal is healthy, integrated adults who develop, well, actually, maybe it's not even that. If our goal is individuals who can find places of belonging and places of being knowing and being known, then we have to stop looking at this as a metric to achieve, as
Right.
the adoption as a metric to achieve, but also look at, we have to understand that these are situations of need that place a greater than average burden by no fault of anybody besides, I mean, well, it's a long, complicated story. It's often series upon series of people of stories of people who've not been known, who've experienced pain and loss, and have been in
Right.
situations where they that were unmanageable for them, and it perpetuated them. And so somebody is stepping in some capacity to make this to help carry things forward. It's always
Right.
complicated. Um, Part of the battle picture is not just of defending the person who's being abused, it's of locking your shield with the person next to you who's doing that.
Right.
And this is not just does not just apply to this is just one small arena or one small window of places in the world. This can apply to people who are doing what they can to give women safe places to live, to get out of trafficking. It's dealing with victims of abuse and all the forms and flavors of that. It's the people dealing with the very practical issue of people losing homes, people needing to put food on the table because of adverse situations.
Right.
And it's incredibly easy and sometimes a difficult path to navigate, to know exactly how much can I carry myself, how much can I lock my shield with the next person.
Right.
But fundamentally, there has to be a wrestling with that, and there has to be an understanding that we're in this together in some capacity.
Right. Well, isn't that a profound? You asked about the development of a person through war, kind of thing. Isn't that a primary lesson that is learned in that shield wall? Because every person in that shield wall knows you create a gap, that's the end. We're all dead.
Right.
We have to lock shields together. We have to do it together. You want to go off and run in front and fight the battle? Yeah, okay. Feel free, but you're putting everybody here at risk of death for you making that decision, for your ego to make that decision. You learn that lesson really, really well.
Yeah.
It's burned into you. That's the furnace right there. Okay. And there's some lessons as human beings that we will not, cannot, however you want to phrase it, we can't learn other than in battle. Whether it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's physical, whatever it is, those lessons can only be learned in battle.
In times of peace, the soldiers are recruited voluntarily by their own volition, and in times of unrest, they're recruited by need because the situation demands it.
Right.
And we've had many conversations along these lines throughout the podcast, but still there's this returning back to one of the big enemies is ease and peace and safety. Um, and I find it, I don't know how to communicate this perfectly and accurately. It's we should welcome peace. We should be grateful for peace. We should pray for peace. There's also an honest recognition that most of the world has not been peaceful.
Right.
And so there's a sense in which why are we surprised when there is unrest in the world, when lives are threatened, when when leaders do things that they shouldn't do, when you have lawbreakers in positions of power. And yes, it's disappointing. If you look in the context of history, it's also incredibly normal.
Right. Tragically so, but
Tragically
incredibly
so.
normal.
It's
Yeah.
not, it's not, it's not a statement to say it's okay.
No.
It's not a statement. It's all of these things. And maybe if anything, it's a statement to say that there have been many people before us who've walked through that situations like that or more difficult things, and the same God who was present for them is the same God who promises to be present for us as well.
Right. Right.
And I think we also see that theme emerging in these stories in the Old Testament. There's a very real difference between there was a recognition that, first of all, there was a recognition that not all battles were meant to be fought. Um, some were man's
Right.
battles and some were God's battles. And then there was also recognition. We see this in the story of Jonathan when Jonathan broke into the Philistines and like there's this chaos and Saul goes rushing in and they're all just killing each other, um, like the Philistines are, and and there's the silly vow and all this foolish vow and all this stuff that there's this continual recognition throughout there that first the people say, look, Jonathan won the war, and we mean to say that God won the war and Jonathan was in effect the willing participant. But there's a recognition that there is, I think one of the lessons of it as well is that there's a greater cause, there's a greater good. God, this is we can choose to align with God or not, and and we are in His hands, and we trust that the victory is His and not ours. Um, and we don't take credit for it. I think perhaps that's another useful lesson from as we look at that.
There's a sense, like as you're talking, this phrase, kind of came to mind. Like there's a sense if in your life you have never found yourself in a position that you didn't want to be, you wish you could be out of, but there is no way out of it, you truly have never entered the desert.
Right.
And I'm not talking about it was uncomfortable for you. I'm talking about your skin is crawling. You wish the floor would open up and you could fall through, like be away from this situation, and you're like Jesus in the garden. You're like a caged animal and you're sweating blood. And in that moment, that switch flipping moment where you're honest enough to say, God, if you can take this away, please do. But at the end of the day, I want what you want. If you haven't had a moment like that, then you haven't been through the desert. and my heart breaks for you. Like when the bills are stacking up and you have no way to pay them. When the child is in the hospital with cancer and there's nothing you can do. What do you do? What do you do in that moment? Do you pray what that prayer? Do you have that conversation with God? God, if you can take this away, if you can make it different, please do. But at the end of the day, I don't see everything. I don't know everything. What you want is more important. So I'm going to go through whatever it is that is in front of me. If you hadn't had that moment, don't pretend you have some sort of maturity or some sort of standing. It's limited because you can stand back and you can judge and you can project all you want onto people. But until you've been in that position and you know what it feels like, you got nothing to say. There's nothing for you to say. But the danger is we as human beings pretend like we do have something to say,
Yeah.
and we don't.
We have a compulsion to fill the silence.
Right.
I have a compulsion to fill the silence, let's be honest.
Yep. Me too. Especially when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
Have
that's the
you
formation of a person, right? Going back to Saul and what we were talking about, like that's the formation of a person. At any moment, Saul could have been like, man, I really screwed that up. There's something for me to learn here.
right?
But there's this continual pattern of externalizing comfort or soothing, whether it's via Samuel or it's via David or it's via mediums or it's whatever the case may be. There's this externalizing of soothing. So, in a very fundamental sense, I started talking about responsibility. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Well, I found that I don't know what your experience has been. I found that the bigger experience of helplessness have helped me to surrender to the helplessness in smaller situations.
Yeah,
And when you're in a situation that's so dramatically outside of your control, it does give you opportunity to see things from a different perspective. And then it opens up the door for God to start working with you in smaller, less dramatic ways where uh, I don't have a good example, but I just situations that are uncomfortable where in the past you would have managed your way out of,
yeah,
and you throw up your hands and surrender in some part to say, I don't have to manage. I choose not to manage my way out of, and allow
yeah,
this to form what needs to be formed in me.
right.
And that's not irresponsibility. Um, and man, I mean, it could be misconstrued as irresponsibility. Um,
Easily, easily misconstrued.
one one of my friends, I think this is one of my friends recently observed me. He's like, "Yeah, you seem to be a lot more comfortable just telling people no and letting them deal with the fallout of that." And And I was like, well, let's take that as a compliment. And I think there's this there's also this recognition of our own humanity. I only have so many people I can realistically help. I do have people who are depending on me to show up emotionally and physically and spiritually in all the ways. And 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 maybe this is more of an issue of being unwilling to really help people who don't take responsibility for themselves, who would have capacity should they choose to. Uh, I don't know. That
Right.
was more like a random thought flooding through my brain.
Well,
Uh,
there's something that strikes me in the midst of that, like on the other side. Like until I sit down, and I think this is very Matthew 18 focused, until I sit down, look you in the eye, ask you questions, have a conversation with you, I have no right to judge whether you're being responsible or you're blame shifting, or I have no right whatsoever. Because I have no context for that. The only context I have is my perception and the emotions attached to it.
right.
I can't do it. And so we sit down and we have this conversation and we listen to each other. Okay. And then maybe there's still some things to iron out. So we bring two or three others in and say, hey, can you give us some perspective here? And we all sit down and we all look eye to eye and we all ask questions. Okay. And then there's still some things that need to be ironed out. So we bring it to these elders, these people who have lived a long time and gained this wisdom, and we go, hey, what do you see here? There's no confrontation here. There's just knowing and being known.
Right.
So until I have done that, I have zero right to judge whether you're taking responsibility or not. Zero right. But we don't want to do that as human beings. Anytime I get an email from a parent or that kind of thing, my first thing is, hey, let's sit down face to face and talk. Let's see what's here. Look me in the eye. I'll look you in the eye. Let's have a conversation. Let's ask the questions that need to be asked. If we need to acknowledge fault, we'll acknowledge fault. And then we'll move forward. That's the way we're designed. But everything in our culture seems to be separating us from face to face conversation. If I can send a text message or I can send an email or I can do a social media post or whatever the case may be. And our urgency, our efficiency, our desire to get things handled like that is killing us.
This is where I hate my analytical part of me. So what you're what you're proposing sounds,
Buckle up.
yeah, right. What you're proposing sounds good. It doesn't work if honesty can't exist in the conversation. And the refusal, the outright refusal to be honest, is easier to deal with than the pretense of honesty.
If I agree with you 100%. And I think it's a two-person equation there.
Right.
If I'm sitting down with you and I suspect that you haven't been honest with me, it is incumbent on me to create an environment where you can be honest.
Right.
If I'm truly interested in you as a person, if I just want to be right, then no, it's not incumbent on me to create that environment. But if I truly am called to walk in the path that Jesus has laid out before us, it is incumbent on me to create an environment where you can be honest. Not a gotcha moment, not a logical fallacy that I can catch you in, none of that. I give you the opportunity, the space to be honest with me. Okay. Now, if you aren't able to do that, at the end of that conversation, I'm going to ask you, have you been completely honest with me? And you say yes. I say, well, we've got nowhere to go then, because I gave you every opportunity.
Right.
And I'm this is me, but I would probably say multiple conversations. I'm not just going to walk away and go, Thias is just lying to me. I'm done. It's multiple conversations. And if at the end of that we still can't get to the truth, then where do we go? That's Saul hiding in the baggage. Can't find you. Okay. But it is incumbent on us to create spaces where each other have the space to share what they honestly think and feel.
So what what are the traits? What is that? I mean, this is probably a whole other episode, so forgive me for asking this right at the end. But how? How do you create that space?
How do you do that?
How do you create that space? What must be present?
What I'm going to do in that space, and this is just my personal opinion, is hey, I love you. I care about you. I want to know where you're coming from. I'm here not to catch you in anything. I'm here to know you. And in knowing you, I'm committing to walking through whatever comes out with you. This is an attempt at union. This is an attempt at friendship. To use the old Christian term, at fellowship. That's what my goal is. That's my mindset. I'm here asking to be your friend, to know you. Not so I can punish you or not so I can, excommunicate you, but so I can walk through whatever comes with you.
Which is a direct assault on achievement, urgency, accomplishment,
Yes.
and it's impossible to have those two things can't coexist.
Yeah. And I would approach it that way because I have had experiences on both sides of that conversation where tragic, horrific mistakes have been made. And the healing thing for me was somebody sitting there saying that to me and then walking it out. And then I've had situations where I was on the other side where tragic mistakes had been made, horrific mistakes had been made, David-esque mistakes had been made, and see a person open up and allow another in to walk through them. It's the only thing that will bring about healing in us as human beings, is a safe space to be able to process what just happened. And there's no glossing over the details. There's no like putting it aside. No, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. No, you have to be honest in that space and go, yeah, this is. This is this is horrific. This is bad. This is painful. This is all these things. And there's no judgment. It's acknowledging the truth of the circumstances. And we're going to walk through it together. The tragedy comes when, to me at least, when one or the other refuses to do that. And then there's all sorts of identity that happens. There's also shame that happens. There's all sorts of uh, soul death that happens in that space.
Right. Well, I suggest we just quick wrap this up so we don't have to deal with the uncomfortable silence and the uncomfortable implications of what you're saying.
The lingering.
Exactly. Um,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
fair.
No, I mean, there's so much. There's so much. Can you imagine what would have changed in Saul, Jonathan, David's life had they been able to legitimately do that?
Yeah, yeah,
Samuel, put Samuel in the mix
yeah.
to have that kind of conversation. It's, it's a very intriguing question.
Right. For next time.
For next time. All right, wonderful. Always a pleasure. Um, to all of you guys listening, um, thanks for your participation, and love to hear from you guys. And Kevin, it's I appreciate the time together, and looking forward till next time.
I do as well. Me too. Till next time.
Bye.